The Dark Elves have been towards the top tier of the competitive meta since Total War Warhammer 2 was released, with a wide range of abilities, a vast roster that allows them to cover almost any situation, and a racial ability that is geared towards murder. These twisted cousins to the Dark Elves have plenty of ways to pull out the big W. But what are some of those top tier units that you can bring in any army, or at least in your army? Today we're going to explore my top picks for the 5 best units in the Dark Elf roster. Now these choices are more from a competitive multiplayer standpoint, as the argument can be made that nearly every unit can be viable in campaign with either Legendary Lord or landmark buffs to the faction. Before we dive into this list though, I want to give a shout out to both Falcon and Aerocrastic, the current and previous Ever-Chosen Invitational champions respectively, for helping me in compiling and fine-tuning this list. Their knowledge of the ins and outs of every unit in the game is almost dizzying. It's so impressive. So please go and check out Aerocrastic's YouTube channel, which I'll be linking in the description below. But let's dive in on our list. Alright, the first one on our list, and number 5, is the Blackguard of Nagaron. Now, this was a pretty challenging slot to fill. They are tied with the honorable mention that we'll talk about at the end of this video, but they come in at 1,300 points, and they have the highest defensive stats of any Dark Elf unit on the roster. In addition, they have quite a lot of AP and anti-large damage, coming in at 24 bonus versus large and 30 AP. Now, they have 2 big factors going for them. One, they are immune to psychology, and they have a very high HP pool. Take a look at that at 6,750. In fact, they have the highest HP pool of any unit in the entire Dark Elf roster, save single entities like the Charybdis. The second highest HP is the Executioner, but the Executioners don't have immune to psychology, and they have a lower sum of stats, including 14 less melee defense. Now, the Blackguard of Nagaron also have a strong matchup against Norskins, Lizardmen, and Tomb Kings. Essentially any army that is going to field cheap, large monsters against you in mass. Lastly, when Murderous Prowess procs, let's take a look at this, bring this bad boy up, they have a whopping 105 leadership, plus they're an innate immune to psychology. It's basically an unbreakable unit for 90 seconds. Murderous Prowess is the main reason that so many low-strength Dark Elf units come back to the fight in the mid to late portion of your battle. The biggest boon of the Blackguard is their synergy with the next unit on our list, which is number 4, the Witch Elves. Coming in at 800 points and 1,050 points for the Regiment of Renown, the big standout ability for the Witch Elves is Madness of Cain. It's the unique poison on the weapons of the Witch Elves that only the Dark Elves, and again, only the Witch Elves, get access to. So not only does it lower the melee defense by 10% and speed by 20% of a unit, but it also rampages the target, effectively locking it into place for it to be surrounded by, say, the Blackguard we were talking about earlier. That's that dreaded 1-2 punch I was talking about. Now, it's worth noting that the Lizardman Cold Blood ability can cancel out this rampage, but it will force a Lizardman player to use that ability if they want to get a unit out of the dreaded rampage tar pit that is the Witch Elves. And again, it could be used defensively to force out that cold blood, so it is a really interesting tactic that you can use as a Dark Elf player. Using Witch Elves to tar pit a high value target, such as a Legendary Lord on a monstrous mount, or a big single entity so that the Blackguard can mop up, is such a strong 1-2 punch. Witch Elves don't require Blackguard to be good. I mean, you could use this with Cold One Knights or any number of Executioners if it's an infantry-based target you're really focusing at. But their combo is just fearsome, coupled with the speed and melee defense penalty that the poison innately gives. In addition to their poison, Witch Elves can buzzsaw through most light infantry units with their anti-infantry. Take a look at this right quick. They've got nice bonus versus infantry of 8. Their frenzy, there it is right there, and their high melee attack of 38. Not to mention, they also boast 20% physical resistance and the upgraded Murderous Prowess, Murderous Mastery. But let's talk about our number 3 option before we go into the exact bonuses and the benefits of Murderous Mastery over Murderous Prowess. Coming in at number 3, the Mothers of Murder themselves, the Sisters of Slaughter. At 1100 points, these are the big sisters to the Witch Elves. You lose the Madness of Cain poison and swap out for regular poison, which is fine. The Sisters of Slaughter are meant to wreak havoc in melee. And remember, poison itself lowers the speed and weapon damage of units by 24 and 20% respectively, so it still gives them plenty of punch. Sisters of Slaughter are absolute anti-infantry beast mode. They share the physical, 20% physical resistance dodge ability of the Witch Elves, but take a look at this, the Trial of Blades. So effectively, for 15 seconds, the Sisters get a buff of +4 AP and +9 melee attack, giving you a grand total of 46 melee attack and 15 AP on a unit that wants to lose in combat, so that it can constantly recharge and have this ability proc again and again. This really adds some, I guess you could call it, active defense to the Sisters. Now, what I mean by that is that rather than mitigating damage through defensive abilities that increase your melee resist, your missile damage resist, so on and so forth, they get stronger as they lose, helping them to do more damage to mitigate the damage that they're taking. And additionally, they have a beastly 59 melee defense, meaning that they are far less likely to get hit than any other unit in not just the Dark Elf roster, but the entire game. That's a higher melee defense stat than most legendary lords. Lastly, and this is something I teased with the Witch Elves, is Murderous Mastery. Let's hover over this. So on paper, it doesn't really seem like much of a change, right? But it is, so let's go through it. For one, you don't get the plus AP to range damage from Murderous Prowess, but that's okay. Witch Elf based units don't really have that. I think the only units that have Murderous Mastery are Witch Elves, the Sisters of Slaughter, the Witch Elf Regiment of Renown, Hellebron, and then the Dread Knight Regiment of Renown. I believe they're the ones that have Murderous Mastery as well. But when you're taking a look at this, you gain Fear, meaning that the unit is also immune to fear, which is so strong as you're pushing into the mid portion of a fight. But it's 30 seconds longer. So for 120 seconds, you're getting plus 25% melee attack, charge bonus, 18% vigor, and 15 leadership. Just as a kind of frame of reference, 18% vigor is about one level of tiredness. So if you hover over them, you see that they're fresh, winded, those levels of tiredness. 18% vigor is about one level of that. So I think fresh is down to winded after that, or fresh to ready then to winded, I believe it is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but either way, 18% is about one tier of tiredness. So if this procs, when your Trial of Blades procs, your Sisters have around 57 melee attack, 59 melee defense, cause fear, and are thus immune to it, and they get 20% physical resistance. These things will just absolutely buzzsaw through anything on the table that they can get their hands on. Second place on our list goes to the Dark Riders with repeater crossbows. They are both 650 points for the standard version and 900 points for the Regiment of Renown you see above. Now, arguably, they are the best unit in the fast cav slot in the entire game, contested maybe by the High Elf Illyrian Reavers. At 92 speed, the only unit faster than them is Illyrian Reaver's Regiment of Renown unit, the Heralds of the Wind, at 105 speed. Short of that, though, you're going to need to use slowing effects, such as spells or poisons, and or a flying unit to tie these guys down, because nothing on the ground will catch them. Now, with the Vanguard ability, Dark Riders can start up close and personal, pouring AP shots into the enemy from the onset. Now, this is important because the Dark Elves, they have a lot of options for ranged AP missiles, right? You have your your Corsairs with with handbows. You have your repeater crossbow units themselves. You have your Shades, all sorts of things. But all of them suffer from terribly low range, and Shades having the highest at 130. Dark Riders are the best chance of delivering your AP missiles without getting overrun, and with the ability to displace somewhere else on the battlefield quickly with that 92 speed. What makes these units so strong is that they are viable in virtually every matchup save a few, with 2 to 4 almost being an auto pick. I mean, it is worth noting that the Empire and Norskins can counter Dark Riders hard, but Dark Riders aren't here to win the skirmish game. They're here to threaten the main battlefield. Corsairs with handbows can take care of skirmishers if you're looking for that. While 115 range isn't excellent, they can also capitalize on that speed by getting into range to threaten high-value units, poke at artillery pieces, or just snipe down lords. A big strategy is keeping 2 or 3 units grouped together and sending them in separate directions when they get countercharged, thus allowing them to provide covering fire to each other. Additionally, towards the mid-game, when Murderous Prowess kicks off, as we've kind of talked about earlier, they will get a nice 18% boost to their vigor, helping to restore some of that freshness, quote-unquote, they will lose as they dart around the battlefield, harrying their targets. In addition, they'll also get a nice 20% AP missile damage bonus from the Murderous Prowess that's going to kick off towards the end of your fights with the Dark Elves. Number 1 on our list, the absolute strongest Dark Elf unit in the roster, is the Scourge Runner Chariot. Coming in at 950 and 1250 points for the Regiment of Renown, these are the newest units added to the game, but an absolute anti-large powerhouse. At 96 weapon strength, these bad boys deal out 40 anti-large harpoon shots onto their target. Now that's 40 bonus versus large, not 40 number amount of harpoons. Now, something that the Dark Riders don't have, but Scourge Runners do, is fire whilst moving, allowing that 84 speed of these things to move them around the battlefield quickly while chucking their harpoons down at a massive range of 150. We already talked about the limited ranged ability of the Dark Elves and getting a lot of good AP missiles down range at a good range and a good ability, and this allows you to do that. Now, for a missile chariot, they also have a considerable stat line, with a massive HP pool of 4,600 or so, and a whopping 80 armor. Comparing it to a Tyrannok chariot, you get 1,000 more HP, and like a number of other things that the Tyrannok chariot is terrible at. Now, to put this into perspective though, they have the same HP and mass stat line as a Cold One chariot, which is supposed to be the quote-unquote melee chariot for the Dark Elves, so it's a very interesting comparison because these are Dark Horses versus the Cold One chariot are Raptor Beasts, so take that as you will. Additionally, again, it is a chariot unit, so it has the anti-infantry melee attack stat line it can use to push through chaff at a bonus versus infantry of 18. Currently, the only thing that can really threaten the Scourge Runner chariot is cannon play. Their speed, armor, and range, plus anti-large, enables them to counter-skirmish any other ranged cav unit. And their anti-infantry allows them to push through any infantry-based anti-large unit that would look to bring them down. Aside from their obvious defensive and countering abilities, the Scourge Runner is so strong against single entity or legendary lore type units that you're hoping to bring down, as well as heavy cavalry units that cannot hope to catch them. And that 84 speed is just going to be so beastly. In addition to that, they can sit at a pretty safe distance, constantly firing on a lord on a monstrous mount, while still keeping, again, a decent range. Their range stat line gives them a whopping 40 AP damage. That is then buffed by 20% from Murderous Prowess, giving them a very tasty 50 AP damage with the aforementioned 40 bonus versus large. To sum it up, it can counter pretty much any one infantry, cavalry, or single entity unit in the game via its shots alone. Then its chariot's ability can ride through infantry easily. Before we move into our honorable mention, I do want to talk real quick about the Ravagers of Rakarth, the Scourge Runner Chariot Regiment of Renown. Now, there's two big things going for these guys. Of course, they have the same exact stat line when it comes to their missile damage. They do have a better reload speed because they are ranked up all the way. So they are going to be dealing out more damage by comparison. You can see here, it's 123 versus that 96. But again, it is just because they're ranked up to rank 9. But they do poison damage, allowing them to lower the speed, the weapon damage, the AP damage, the missile damage of anything they're shooting at. But the biggest thing here is, of course, their barbed net ability, which is again going to further reduce their speed and the missile resistance of things that they're attacking, helping out very, very effectively in helping them get in and out of combat within that 45-meter radius around them, and also just doing a sick amount of damage. It is such an amazing ability. For a quick honorable mention though, the number 5 slot on this list was or is easily swapped out with the Cold One Knights. What they lack in hit points and immune to psychology, they bring in high mobility, heavy mass, and plenty of AP and anti-large playability. In fact, the Blackguard thrive in matchups that I mentioned, right? Norskins, Lizardmen, and Tomb Kings. But the Cold Ones thrive against High Elves, Empire, and Bretonnia. Their higher mass, AP, and anti-large capabilities help them combat against a lot of the heavy cav that those three factions can bring to the table. I think it's worth bringing up before we bring this video to a close, the infantry units that the Dark Elves have access to in the Bleak Swords and Dread Spears. From strictly a competitive standpoint, and not in a campaign one, they're actually quite less cost-effective chaff than other factions. Bleak Swords beat High Elf Spears hands down, but so can other chaff units ranked up to around 500 points of value. Dread Spears and Bleak Swords suffer from the fact that you pay, points-wise, for Murderous Prowess, an ability that you sadly rarely see come to fruition on these units because they are bodies used to trigger the ability by, well, dying. And as far as Doomfire Warlocks go, they unfortunately have a very low stat line of 32 melee attack and 22, almost a 32 melee defense. So you're effectively paying 1,200 points for their special abilities. And they do have a few matchups that they have that are very strong, but most things on this list are auto picks by comparison to these guys. But that sums up our video here today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this romp through our top 5 strongest units of the Dark Elf roster. Again, I want to give a huge thanks and shout out to both Falcon and Aerocrastic for helping me compile this list and fine-tune some of the details on it. I mean, my anecdotal experience can only get you so far compared to the might of 2 ever-chosen champions. So again, a huge shout out to them. And I'd love to hear what you guys think about your picks for the top 5 best Dark Elf units. You might think that the Executioners play a stronger role in your matchups or the games you've played. Remember, this isn't like a hard set list of units that are no matter what going to always be the best. But it is a set of top 5 that has served myself, Aerocrastic, Falcon, and a number of other competitive players, or at least the competitive meta, very well. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. As always, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.